I spent 7 years saving broken teams and turning chaos into strategy. My boss promoted the woman who couldn't even read a P.L. So I handed him my resignation and walked away, leaving behind a system so essential they didn't realize I'd been the one holding it all together. 2 months later, the calls began. The email arrived at 9:03 a.m. sharp. Subject: quick check-in, Linda S. Elena Blake stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. No emojis, no exclamation marks. Just cold Helvetica font with the weight of finality. She had waited 6 weeks for this meeting. The promotion board had been deliberating, they said. But Elena had already done the math, performance metrics, client retention, project turnarounds, all of it. The numbers pointed to her. Still, something in her chest tightened. Linda Sanderson's corner office was a sunlit cube of steel and status. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, but the real view that mattered was the one behind Linda's desk, a row of framed awards, most of which had Elena's fingerprints behind them. "Elena, come in," Linda called out, voice syrupy as always, the smile not quite reaching her eyes. She gestured toward the gray leather chair across from her. Elena sat spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She'd worn her navy blazer not because it made her feel powerful but because it made her feel calm. Linda leaned back, manicured nails tapping the desk in a slow rhythm. "Elena, you've done extraordinary work here," she began, and Elena's stomach dropped. "Not this. Not the sandwich feedback. I mean it," Linda continued. 7 years. You've been the backbone of this department. Your strategic insights, your project recoveries, honestly. I don't know how we would have survived the Baxter account last year without you." Elena said nothing. She knew how this went. When the compliments were this stacked, the disappointment was coming. Linda exhaled. "That said, we've decided to offer the Director of Strategic Operations role to Kayla." There it was. Delivered with surgical precision. Elena blinked once. That was the only visible reaction. Kayla. The same Kayla who once asked Elena what EBITDA stood for during a pitch review. The Kayla who curated LinkedIn posts like art pieces and brought in color-coded cupcakes for Wellness Wednesdays. Elena felt the sentence forming, the one she wanted to say. "Is this a joke?" But she swallowed it. "She's got a real presence," Linda added quickly, as if sensing the silence was too heavy. "People gravitate to her. She's easier to work with." There it was. The word. Easier. Not better. Not more competent. Not more capable. Just easier. It buzzed in Elena's head like an insect trapped between her ribs. Linda continued talking something about soft skills and cultural synergy, but Elena wasn't listening anymore. Her hands were cold, tucked beneath the lip of the chair, her nails digging soft half-moons into her palms. 7 years. 7 years of saying yes to last-minute client meetings, of staying in the office until the janitors started bringing her leftovers, of fixing other people's messes and never once demanding recognition. And Kayla was easier. "Elena," Linda said more gently, "now you're brilliant. And we see you. This isn't a reflection of your value." Elena met her gaze. Calm. Steady. "But it is," she said, voice low. "That's exactly what it is." Linda paused, clearly thrown off. I didn't mean." "It's okay," Elena cut in, her words like silk over steel. "You don't have to explain. You made a decision. I understand." Linda softened, mistaking Elena's composure for compliance. "I know this may be disappointing, but I hope you'll continue to bring your energy and excellence to the team. Your contributions don't go unnoticed. They always say that when they want you to stay quiet." Elena nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then stood. "Thanks for the clarity," she said, walking toward the door. Linda blinked. "You're leaving. I've got work to finish." "Elena," Linda said again, more urgently. "I really hope you'll stay. You're invaluable." Elena didn't turn around. Apparently not invaluable enough. She walked out into the open floor of the office, her heels muted against the thick carpet. Around her, the usual rhythm played: phones ringing, keyboards clacking, someone laughing near the espresso machine. The world hadn't shifted, but she had. A few heads turned as she passed, curious glances, unreadable expressions. She caught sight of Kayla near the break room tossing her highlighted curls and chatting with a junior analyst. Kayla's eyes met hers for a brief second. There was a flicker of surprise, maybe guilt, or maybe just discomfort at having to make eye contact with the woman she'd just leapfrogged. Elena held her gaze, gave a tight, polite smile. Then moved on. Back at her desk, she sat down quietly, opened her drawer, pulled out a single envelope, crisp, white, uncreased. She didn't feel anger. Not exactly. What she felt was sharper, more refined, like the click of a lock being undone. Not rage. Resolution. Elena sat at her desk, the city skyline glinting faintly on the glass divider beside her. She stared down at the cream-colored envelope lying on the desk like a loaded weapon. Not dramatic, not impulsive, just inevitable. It had lived quietly in the inside pocket of her leather planner for months, printed, signed, sealed, a contingency plan. A whisper of a possibility. Until this morning, she had still believed there was a version of this story where she stayed. Where merit meant something. She reached for it now, her hands steady, her breathing smooth. Across the office, people carried on like nothing had shifted. She could hear Kayla's voice floating in from somewhere near the design team, cheerful, unbothered, loud in the way people are when they've just been handed something they didn't fully earn. Elena tucked the envelope into her notebook, stood, and walked back toward Linda's office. The same hallway. The same thick carpet. But this time her steps felt quieter, not in hesitation, but in precision. Like someone who had stopped walking in circles. She knocked once on the frosted glass door. Linda looked up surprised. Elena. Is everything I forgot to give you, something Elena said simply. She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. The muffled office noise disappeared. Linda tilted her head. You don't need to follow up on the promotion decision. I know it's disappointing, but we can. I'm not here to follow up, Elena said, pulling the envelope from her notebook and laying it gently on the desk between them. Linda blinked. What's this? My resignation. Effective 2 weeks from today. For a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the air vent above them. Linda stared at the envelope as if it might be a prop or a joke or a test she hadn't studied for. Elena, she said, finally, voice softer now. We didn't expect this. Elena met her gaze evenly. That's the problem. You never expected me to leave because you never expected me to matter. Linda sat back slightly, blinking rapidly as if recalibrating the power balance in the room. You're making a decision in the heat of emotion, she said carefully. I really think we should talk this through. There's no emotion here, Elena said. At least not the kind you're imagining. Then why now? Linda pressed. You've worked so hard, and I've watched that work be diluted, dismissed, and handed off to people who speak louder in meetings, or smile more at happy hour. Elena's voice didn't rise. If anything, it quieted, sharpened. I've led departments through disaster. I've salvaged contracts on the edge of collapse. And still I'm told I'm just not the right fit. Linda leaned forward. You are valuable, Elena. I've always said that. Elena offered a small, controlled smile. No, Linda. You said I was efficient. You said I was a fixer. You said I was reliable. But valuable number, if you thought that we'd be having a very different conversation. Linda's fingers hovered over the envelope, hesitant. As if touching it would make the words on the page real. Final. Elena, I hope you're not doing this because of Kayla. This has nothing to do with Kayla, Elena replied. This has to do with a culture that praises visibility over value. With the kind of leadership that says, we admire your work while refusing to recognize it. Linda looked at her, studying her face for some sign of regret or softness, but Elena had none to offer. There was no bitterness in her voice, no triumph. Only precision. I don't understand, Linda said quietly. Why walk away now? You've invested years here. Elena took a slow breath. And you've invested in the people who made the least difference but took up the most space. I won't do it anymore. I won't beg to be seen. A long silence stretched between them. Linda looked down at the envelope again, then up at Elena. Is there anything I can say to make you reconsider? Elena shook her head. You had years to say something that mattered. You chose not to. So I did. And with that she turned. The walk out of the office felt different now. The glass walls that once boxed her in now reflected a version of herself she almost didn't recognize, poised, unshaken, already gone. People turned as she passed. Maybe they sensed it, the shift in atmosphere. Maybe it was the way she held her chin slightly higher or the way her steps landed without pause. She didn't stop at her desk. She didn't look back. She pressed the elevator button and waited in silence. Kayla's voice echoed faintly again. "I'm just so honored. I never thought they'd pick me." Laughter followed. Elena didn't flinch, because the truth was they hadn't picked Kayla. They'd overlooked Elena. And there's a difference. The elevator dinged softly and the doors opened. She stepped in alone. As the floors lit up one by one on the descent, she let the moment settle. This wasn't grief. This wasn't even anger. This was clarity. The rain had started just as Elena stepped off the elevator. It wasn't heavy, more of a whisper on the glassy sidewalks, a quiet tapping on her umbrella as she walked down Fifth Avenue toward the subway. She moved slowly, not in defeat, but in control, like someone rewinding every conversation in her mind to capture the exact moment she knew it would end like this. She had always known. 3 years ago, after another Friday all-hands meeting where her metrics were skimmed and Kayla's team bonding bingo was applauded, Elena walked home with blistered heels and a clenched jaw. That night, she sat at her kitchen table still in work clothes, makeup smudged, and opened a fresh blank notebook. At the top of the page, she wrote, "What if I built something they couldn't ignore?" That was the night Clarity One was born. It started with a spreadsheet. Then a concept map. Then algorithms scribbled in margins next to grocery lists. She wasn't building a product, she was designing a counter-argument to every dismissal, every "you're too clinical," every "let's focus on culture first." Clarity One wasn't just about measuring productivity, it tracked team dynamics, workload, balance, burnout trends, even micro-patterns in communication breakdowns. It didn't just report problems, it predicted them. She worked in shadows, early mornings, late nights, long weekends, fueled by coffee, lo-fi beats, and the hunger to never be disregarded again. Her apartment became a lab. Whiteboards leaned against walls, tabs open on 3 monitors, books piled under her lamp like sandbags, holding her sanity in place. No one at work knew. They saw a quiet overachiever who never complained. They didn't see the woman teaching herself Python at 2 a.m. or the night she recoded the dashboard after an integration bug erased 60 hours of work. Elena wasn't building revenge, she was building proof. She filed for an LLC under the name Clarity Systems, listing herself as founder and principal architect. A friend from her MBA program, now an angel investor, quietly joined after seeing her prototype. "This isn't just smart," he said, "it's surgical." By the second year, she'd onboarded a freelance developer and a UX designer from Denmark. They worked remotely under NDAs, building out the beta version while she continued her day job like nothing had changed. Every all-nighter, every skipped brunch, every silent breakthrough, it was all deliberate. She pitched the product to Apex 3 times. First as an internal dashboard for department heads. Linda smiled and said, "We love your initiative, Elena, but this seems too technical." Second, as a pilot tool to support the strategy team. Linda replied, "Interesting, but not sure it aligns with our interpersonal first approach." Third, with a full deck ROI projections and a 6-month rollout plan. Linda didn't even look at the final page. "It's sharp," she said, "but we're trying to be more human-centric this year." Human-centric. That word lodged in Elena's mind like glass in a wound. As if what she offered was robotic. As if caring about outcomes somehow made her cold. They didn't want to see her, not fully, not clearly. So she stopped offering. And she started protecting. She filed a provisional patent 16 months before her resignation. 3 months after that, the full application was submitted, legally binding. Her name, her code, her data. The startup began a silent soft launch with a mid-size HR consultancy in Austin. After 1 quarter, the firm reported a 23% increase in project delivery speed and a 17% drop in burnout claims. Elena didn't post about it. No LinkedIn humble brags. No podcast interviews. Just screenshots in a private folder labeled Proof of Impact. Because Elena had learned early that speaking too soon, especially as a woman in rooms full of ego, only gave them time to steal your thunder and call it collaboration. So she waited. She kept receipts. And the entire time they had no idea. No idea that the systems they dismissed were already being used across 3 states. No idea that while they handed promotions based on charisma, Elena was quietly mapping how to replace everything they once thought irreplaceable. Even Kayla, with her curated optimism and pastel PowerPoint slides, had once asked Elena, "How do you always keep things so organized? Like, what's your system?" Elena had smiled. Habit. What she didn't say was, "I built the system. You're standing on it." Now, as she rode the subway home, the train car full of umbrellas and tired eyes, Elena let herself lean back and breathe. She was no longer the woman hoping they'd notice. She was the woman they never bothered to understand, and that was their mistake. Outside, the rain turned heavier, the windows blurred. But Elena had never seen things more clearly. Before Clarity One, before the pitch decks and patent applications, before she taught herself to armor her brilliance in silence, Elena had tried to belong. She wasn't always quiet, not in the beginning. When she joined Apex Strategies at 28, fresh off a dual master's in data science and organizational leadership, she was bold, bright-eyed, maybe even a little too hopeful. She had ideas, big ones. She raised her hand. She challenged bad assumptions in meetings. She offered improvements when something didn't make sense. At first they smiled. Then they started calling her things. Elena's sharp, maybe a little too direct. She means well, but her delivery is intense. She doesn't quite get the room dynamics. The worst part. No one ever said it to her face. The feedback came in vague whispers sandwiched in performance reviews that praised her execution but advised her to soften her approach. She tried. God, she tried. She listened more, talked less. Bit her tongue when someone made a suggestion she knew wouldn't work. Smiled through brainstorming sessions where men repeated her ideas 5 minutes later and got nods of approval. She learned to nod too. Learned to write follow-up emails that translated the chaos into coherence. Learned to smile while someone else got the credit. Learned that if she ever wanted to be promoted, she had to be less, not smarter, not faster, just less. Once during a company offsite, the managing director asked everyone to list 3 adjectives to describe their personal brand. Elena said strategic solution, driven, and grounded. Kayla giggled and said you might want to throw in fun just to balance the room. Everyone laughed. Elena smiled too, but something in her dimmed that day. She stopped raising her hand so much. One Friday, she was quietly pulled from a leadership roundtable she had helped organize. No explanation. Later she heard from a colleague that Linda wanted more voices with emotional range at the table. And then came the pitch. It was a Thursday afternoon. Kayla was presenting a new internal proposal, a dashboard for team workload balance, featuring predictive analytics and visual workload alerts. The execs loved it. Called it fresh, forward-thinking, human-centric. Elena sat in the back of the room, pulse steady, eyes blank. It was hers. She had shared that exact idea with Kayla 2 months prior during a casual lunch. At the time, Kayla had nodded between sips of her kale smoothie and said, "I don't really get how that would work, but it sounds cool." Now she was up there workshopping Elena's language, even the phrase team fatigue thresholds, which Elena had coined after weeks of late-night research. She didn't say a word. That night she walked 5 blocks past her subway stop before realizing where she was. The city lights blurred in her periphery. She wasn't angry, she was hollow. That weekend she didn't touch her Clarity One code. She didn't touch anything. Just sat in her apartment staring at a blank wall, trying to remember why she even tried. It wasn't until Sunday morning when her old mentor Adrian called out of the blue. Adrian had been one of the first women Elena worked under, a VP with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense laugh. She had left Apex years ago after calling out a leadership culture allergic to competence. Elena had never forgotten that phrase. "I saw your name on a short list in an industry report," Adrian said. "Didn't know you were still there." "I am Elena," said her voice tight. Adrian paused. Still playing small to make the room comfortable, Elena didn't answer. Then Adrian said something that stitched itself into Elena's bones. Don't shrink, Elena. You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself just to make them feel bigger. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Elena wrote that line on a sticky note and stuck it to her bathroom mirror. She still sees it every morning. From then on, she stopped trying to be likable. She started trying to be undeniable. She didn't confront Kayla about the pitch. She didn't go to HR. She didn't send a bitter email or plot an office war. She just opened her notebook, turned to a clean page, and began rewriting her codebase. Not to punish them, but to outgrow them. Because Elena had learned something essential, something that would guide every choice moving forward. When they call you too much, what they really mean is, we didn't build this space for someone like you and you scare us. Now, sitting in her apartment with the rain still drumming the windows and the scent of mint tea curling from her desk, Elena opened her laptop. She didn't check her inbox. She didn't scroll LinkedIn. She opened the Clarity One control panel, her cursor hovering over the Launch Phase 2 tab. Her fingers didn't tremble. Because she remembered now. She had never been too much. She had just been too ahead for rooms that never learned how to hold women like her. The cafe was tucked between a florist and a tailor on a quiet street in Tribeca. No branding on the windows, just soft wooden chairs, pale tile floors, and the smell of dark roast drifting like incense in the morning light. Elena arrived 10 minutes early. She chose the table in the back corner facing the entrance. Old habit. She liked to see people as they walked in to gauge their pace, their posture, the energy they brought into a room. She didn't have to wait long. At 801 Jordan Hayes Street stepped inside. He didn't wear a tie, never did according to industry rumor. Just a charcoal wool coat, crisp slacks, and an unshakable presence. CEO of Hayes and More, the fastest growing consultancy in the Northeast known for snapping up talent, Apex let fall through the cracks. Elena, he said, voice smooth and direct. Thanks for making time. I was curious, she said, shaking his hand. Not flattered, just curious. He smiled, sliding into the seat across from her. That's fair. A waitress came by. Jordan ordered black coffee. Elena declined. Her pulse was already running higher than usual. He placed a slim black folder on the table between them but didn't open it. We've been following your work for over a year, he began. Clarity One is impressive, doesn't do it justice. Elena kept her expression still. You couldn't have seen much. I haven't marketed it. You didn't need to, Jordan said. We saw the results. One of our advisory partners sits on the board of Covalent HR, the firm you soft launched with. Elena arched a brow. Jordan continued, they reported double-digit gains in delivery efficiency. Their chief of ops said it was like flipping a switch in a dark room. Suddenly, they could see where everything was leaking. She allowed a small nod. We've been careful with rollout. You've been brilliant with rollout, he corrected, but let me cut to it. I'm not here to offer you a job. Her hands resting on her lap didn't move. Then what are you offering? He leaned forward, voice steady. I'm offering equity. Full control over your platform. A team handpicked by you. Direct access to every decision funnel, and a stake, not symbolic, a real one. You'd be a partner. Strategy and systems innovation. Elena blinked once. Jordan didn't flinch. We don't want to hire you, Elena. We want to back you. The words dropped between them like stones in water, small, heavy, rippling far outward. She studied his face. No flattery, no manipulation. Just clarity. You could have waited until Apex imploded, she said slowly. Picked me up after they broke everything. We're not vultures, Jordan said. We're architects. And you're the most precise systems thinker I've seen in years. You don't belong in a bullpen. You belong at the table where the blueprint gets drawn. It wasn't flattery. It was recognition. For the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel like she had to shrink to fit the room. The room had expanded. What about my patent, she asked. You keep it, he replied. License it through our firm, full royalties, full credit. If we scale it globally, and we will, you'll get founder-level return. This isn't a contract, it's a bet. On you. Elena stared down at the folder. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she said something she hadn't allowed herself to say out loud in years. I didn't build Clarity One for Apex. I built it because I needed to prove I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't too rigid or too intense or too much, he finished. She looked up, their eyes met. Jordan's voice dropped lower. Men don't get called that when they build things that work. A sharp breath caught in her throat. She nodded once. I need time to think, she said. Take it, he said, pushing the folder gently toward her. But I'm not worried. Because deep down I think you've already left them. You just haven't told yourself yet. He stood, shook her hand again, and left the cafe without a single backward glance. Elena stayed, seated, fingers resting on the folder's edge. She didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt aligned. Like finally the ground beneath her matched the direction she'd always been walking in. She didn't open the folder until she got home. Inside was a single-page term sheet. Clean. Direct. No buried clauses. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the top that made her pause. Build it your way. The world's finally ready to follow. Elena sat down at her kitchen table, the same place where 3 years ago she had scribbled her first line of code on a napkin. Her reflection in the laptop screen stared back, older, sharper, more silent than before, but also ready. She didn't need the title, she didn't need the desk. She didn't even need revenge. What she needed, what she had built, was a different table. And this time her seat was carved by her own hands. On her final Monday at Apex, Elena arrived early. She stepped into the office at 7:05 a.m., an hour before most of the staff filtered in with half-finished lattes and sleepy small talk. The lights hummed low. The carpet still held the weight of silence. It felt like stepping into the ghost of a place she had already left. She dropped her bag at her desk and pulled out a notepad. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Exit checklist, not for me, for them." Because that's what this week was for. Not for closure, not for bitterness, for legacy. Elena didn't pack her things first. She backed up data. She pulled performance decks from shared drives. Training handbooks she had built from scratch. Client onboarding systems she had refined over 3 years. Email templates, performance forecasting, spreadsheets, quarterly reflection guides, all the quiet architecture that made Apex run without people noticing. She didn't delete. She documented. Not to sabotage. To leave, no doubt. She labeled everything clearly. Created an internal index. 01. Training modules, EB. 02. Client journey maps, AB. 03. Team analytics model, EB. Each folder meticulously organized. Each file signed in metadata with her initials. Let them know who did the work. Let them try to deny it after the fact when it was too late to recreate. By Tuesday, people started noticing. Hey Elena, someone from HR pinged her on Slack. Quick cue. Did you build the behavioral insight tracker the strategy team uses? I'm trying to find the owner. She smiled, typed back. Yes. Folders in shared, tools, analytics, EB, suite. Another message came in by noon. Elena. The client milestone tracker was that your model. We're trying to troubleshoot an update and another. Elena, do you have access to the onboarding workflow logic? I thought it was Kayla's. But by Wednesday, her name was everywhere. In queries, in questions, in confusion. She didn't respond with sarcasm. She responded with clarity. Her dignity wasn't for sale. And she'd already been paid, not in money, not yet, but in knowing she had built something they didn't even understand enough to preserve. Her desk stayed mostly untouched. She kept working like she always did, quietly, precisely. But the energy was different. People walked by slower, looked over with hesitation. Even Kayla had stopped doing her usual morning rounds of exaggerated greetings. Elena was a ghost now. But not the haunting kind. The kind you feel in the bones of a building long after the architect has left. On Thursday, she printed her final document, a handbook for the next team leader, even though they hadn't appointed one yet. It was titled Sustainable Strategy Systems, a living framework inside 17 pages of team rhythms and rituals. An outline for bi-weekly impact audits. A breakdown of collaboration patterns and how to optimize based on project type. A reminder in bold, if you're relying on vibes, you're already behind. She signed it simply. EB no goodbye. No flair. On her way out that evening, she passed the wall near the break room where they hung Employee of the Month portraits. There were 8 of Kayla's beaming polished, framed in color. Elena had never been up there. Not once. She paused. Then kept walking. Because recognition built on popularity fades. But structure that stays. That night she logged into the Clarity One dashboard from her apartment. The pilot program for Hayes and Moore's internal use was scheduled to launch in 10 days. Elena clicked through each dashboard tab like a conductor reviewing a symphony. Performance heat maps, workload threshold alerts, predictive burnout timelines, all ticking perfectly. Quiet brilliance. Just like she intended. At 10:43 p.m., a Slack message appeared. Linda. Can you stop by my office before your exit interview tomorrow? Just 10 minutes. LS Elena didn't reply. She closed her laptop. She already knew what that conversation would be. The same way she knew how this week would end. Not with a door slammed, not with a mic drop, with silence, with documentation, with proof. On Friday morning, as she handed in her ID badge and signed her final HR form, the receptionist hesitated. Miss Blake. I just wanted to say, she paused. I've always watched how you work. I learned a lot just by observing you. Elena's smile was small, but it reached her eyes. Then I've already done what I came here to do. She walked out into the late morning sun. Crisp, bright, unapologetic. Legacy, not revenge. Because revenge is about proving others wrong. Legacy is about making it impossible for them to forget you were right. It started with a missed deadline. Nothing catastrophic, just a quarterly proposal for a long-term client that went out 48 hours late, riddled with mismatched data points and a glaring typo in the executive summary. Minor, they said. Manageable. Then came the second one. A renewal contract misfiled. A service-level agreement breach. Then a third, of budgeting error that triggered an unplanned audit. By the time the fourth issue hit, a failed client presentation that resulted in a pulled contract, the leadership team at Apex Strategies started asking harder questions. And one name kept resurfacing. Elena. 2 months after she walked out of the building, the cracks began to show. Not as explosions, but as slow creeping fractures, the kind that start beneath the surface, hidden until the weight becomes too much. The systems she designed, workflow buffers, team stress, indicators, performance feedback loops, had kept things running so seamlessly that no one noticed they existed. Until they didn't. And Kayla was drowning. She smiled in meetings. She reposted Forbes articles on empathetic leadership. She added emojis to internal memos. But she didn't understand the mechanics beneath the charisma. She didn't know how to interpret the trend lines in the forecasting tools. Didn't know why the deliverables tracker was flagging task drift. Didn't know how to recalibrate the burnout thresholds. Because Elena had written those systems, and no one had bothered to learn them. By week 8, Apex had lost 4 major clients, a 40% revenue dip from their Q1 projection. Project managers were overextended, middle managers panicked, and junior analysts started whispering in break rooms. Didn't Elena used to flag this stuff early? Where's her dashboard? Did anyone keep the playbooks she made? No one could answer. Kayla held an emergency town hall. She wore a pale blazer and spoke with forced brightness. We're entering a season of transformation, she said, eyes darting between note cards. And I believe transformation is opportunity. Someone coughed. A few exchanged looks. Elena would never have said something that vague. Elena would have shown numbers. On LinkedIn, the company's page remained silent. But in Slack threads and private texts, the narrative was clear: Apex wasn't broken until the person holding the glue left. Linda noticed it too. She called 3 cross-functional meetings in 1 week. She demanded updates. She asked questions that once upon a time Elena would have anticipated and solved before they even surfaced. Now answers came in stumbling fragments. I think we archived that dashboard. I'm not sure where she stored the backup logic. I believe Kayla is reworking the process, but we haven't seen it yet. By the end of the quarter, a board member asked bluntly in a strategy meeting, "What happened to the systems Elena Blake built?" Linda hesitated. They were Transitional, she said weakly. We've moved toward more dynamic leadership models. The room went quiet. One of the senior analysts, a quiet man who rarely spoke in exec meetings, finally said dynamic is great. But Elena's models worked. I haven't seen anything since that even comes close. No one argued. Because the data didn't lie. Turnover among mid-level staff had risen by 17%. Client complaints had doubled. Morale scores from the latest internal survey dropped 23% compared to the previous year. Worse, the systems that once prevented crises were now missing, replaced by good intentions and motivational hashtags. And still no one knew how to fix it. Linda tried to reach out. She sent an email to Elena's old work address. It bounced. She sent a message to her personal inbox. Would love to catch up, perhaps coffee. Hope you're well, Linda. No response. Because Elena wasn't checking for their apology. She was building something else. A month later, an internal memo leaked. It referenced a potential culture reorg and external consultant engagement to evaluate operational blind spots. The irony, the blind spot had a name. And they'd let her walk out the door. Back at Hayes and Moore, Elena sat in a sunlit corner office with a direct view of the Brooklyn Bridge. The soft clack of her keyboard echoed through the minimalist space as she finalized a new feature integration for ClarityOne, one that would auto-detect disengagement patterns based on language in team messages. She wasn't surprised when she read the industry newsletter headline Apex Strategies loses 40% of Q2 clients amid workflow breakdown. The article quoted unnamed insiders describing unraveled infrastructure, undefined accountability, and mysterious knowledge gaps. Elena read the whole thing, then closed the tab. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't send it to anyone. Because this wasn't a victory dance. This was the natural result of not listening when the quiet one speaks. She stood, poured herself a second cup of black coffee, and returned to her desk. Her new team had already flagged a request from a Fortune 500 client seeking early access to ClarityOne's next phase. There was more to build, more to scale, more to prove, not out of ego but out of purpose. Elena had never wanted them to fail. She just knew they would without a system that understood the people behind the numbers. And now, they finally understood what she meant. At Hayes and Moore, the air felt different. Meetings started on time. Feedback was direct but respectful. There were no posters about vibe alignment or morning huddles with forced icebreakers. Instead, there was structure, clarity, and results. Elena Blake didn't speak often in the early days. She didn't need to. People paid attention when she entered a room. Not because she demanded it, but because everything moved smoother when she was around. Calendars became cleaner, priorities sharpened. Problems surfaced before they turned into fires. In less than 2 months, ClarityOne was fully integrated into 3 core divisions. The impact was immediate. Project completion time dropped by 30%. Team retention rose 18%. Reported burnout symptoms among staff dropped nearly in half. And yet, Elena refused every request for interviews or internal praise. She redirected credit to the teams. Built dashboards that spotlighted collaboration, not just performance. She made leaders feel smarter, not smaller. That's why people followed her. She didn't command rooms. She changed how the rooms functioned. Jordan Hayes watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. During a leadership roundtable, he leaned over and said to the COO, "She doesn't just fix systems. She recalibrates cultures one line of code at a time." Word spread. One Thursday morning, an internal survey asked employees to name a leader they trusted most. Elena's name topped the list. She wasn't even in the drop-down. Dozens had typed it in manually. She had no official title beyond partner, strategy, and systems innovation. But people treated her like something more. Like the compass. At the end of each quarter, Elena's dashboards weren't just reviewed, they were studied. Leadership printed them. Team leads quoted her reports during reviews. Even skeptics started integrating her burnout prediction models into planning workflows. And perhaps most importantly, no one asked her to smile more. Or speak less. They just asked her what she saw coming next. One afternoon, while reviewing data from a product team's weekly syncs, she noticed a subtle spike in skipped check-ins from one subgroup. Not enough to sound an alarm, but enough to make her curious. She called the team lead in for a quiet 15-minute chat. The issue: a senior developer was struggling to adapt to a new Agile framework and was falling behind but too proud to admit it. Elena didn't escalate it. She coached the lead on how to reroute, support, redistribute task weight, and address the core friction gently. The next month, that same team delivered their best sprint in 6 quarters. When the lead sent her a private thank you note, she simply replied, "Great systems are built on honest data. You listened. That's leadership." She never mentioned it again. But the next week, a handwritten post-it appeared on the internal office wall where team members could share anonymous appreciation. She doesn't take the credit. She builds the environment where credit becomes collective. EB across the company, that note spread like gospel. New hires asked, "Who's EB?" Someone always replied with a half smile, "You'll know her when you see her." Elena rarely walked the floor. But when she did, people stopped typing. Not out of fear, out of focus. Because she'd earned something that no performance review could measure: trust. And across the river, Apex was still flailing. Another article leaked to the press: "Culture over competence, Apex's costly mistake." Elena didn't read past the headline. She didn't need to. Her inbox was already full, not with job offers, but with invitations, universities requesting guest lectures on ethical leadership, a Fortune 100 firm asking to license ClarityOne, a VC group proposing a partnership to fund initiatives for women in analytics. But the message that made her pause came from someone unexpected: Adrian. Her old mentor. The one who'd told her, "Don't shrink." The email was short: "Just saw your name on a keynote list. You've built something extraordinary. They finally see it. Proud doesn't cover it." Elena read it 3 times. Then closed her laptop and stood by the office window watching the late afternoon sun shimmer across the East River. She didn't smile, not fully. But her shoulders dropped just slightly, as if laying down a weight she didn't realize she still carried. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was never truly about them. It was about doing the work so well, so consistently, so intentionally that eventually even the people who had overlooked you couldn't look away any longer. Elena turned from the window, walked back to her desk, and opened her planner to a clean page. At the top she wrote Phase 3 expansion. Because this wasn't her peak, it was just her new baseline. The ballroom at the National Women in Leadership Summit was nothing short of stunning. High-arched ceilings. Soft gold uplighting. Rows upon rows of chairs filled with founders, executives, strategists, and silent warriors in tailored suits and quiet ambition. Elena stood backstage, hands folded calmly in front of her. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. She had spoken in rooms like this before, just never with a microphone, never from the stage. She had always been the woman behind the screen, the author of the systems, the strategist who fixed what broke quietly. But today they hadn't invited her to whisper from the wings. They'd handed her the spotlight. A stage manager waved. "You're up in 30 seconds. Elena exhaled slowly, smoothing the hem of her navy blazer. No slides, no charts, no buzzwords, just her words. Her voice. And her truth. As the host announced her name, the crowd began clapping, a slow, respectful build. And when Elena stepped out under the lights, something happened that she hadn't expected. The room stilled. Not in formality, in presence. People didn't look at their phones. They didn't shuffle papers. They looked up. She took her place behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and spoke. "When I started my career, I thought value would speak for itself. I thought if I worked hard enough, delivered consistently, and stayed focused, someone would see me, and they did. Kind of. They saw the results. They saw the deadlines met, the crises averted, the clients retained. But they never saw me. Not fully." She paused, letting the silence settle. "Instead, I was told I was too much. Too direct, too intense, too analytical, too focused on outcomes." A few nods rippled in the crowd. A hum of agreement. Elena continued. "Here's the thing. Intensity did build something. That focus created systems that saved millions. That directness caught problems before they spiraled. And maybe the problem wasn't me. Her voice stayed calm even. Maybe it was the rooms that couldn't hold me. The auditorium exhaled. The quote landed like a chord struck in perfect harmony. Dozens of people sat straighter. Some leaned forward. One woman in the front row blinked hard and bit her lip. Elena went on, not with fury but with precision. We've created a culture where charisma is confused with competence, where being agreeable is seen as more valuable than being accurate. We ask women to be palatable instead of powerful. We tell them to speak softer, smile more, wait their turn. And when they stop shrinking long enough to speak up, we say they're too much. She looked around the room, no slides, no timer. So here's my message: you're not too much. You are simply never meant to fit inside a space built for someone smaller. Silence, reverent. Not empty, full. Then a wave of applause rising like a tide. Not polite, not performative. Earned. The talk wasn't long. Just under 16 minutes, but by the end the audience was on their feet. And later that day, when someone posted a quote from her keynote on LinkedIn, a photo of her at the podium with the caption, "They said I was too intense, but intensity built this future." Elena Blake, NWL Summit. 2025. It went viral in under 3 hours. By the next morning, the clip had reached over 1.2 million views. Comments flooded in. This. Exactly this. Sharing with every woman I mentor. Her voice cracked something open in me. I feel seen for the first time in my career. We were never too much. We were never too late. We were always just a little too ahead. Elena didn't repost it. She didn't need to. The message had left her mouth and was now living in boardrooms, inboxes, and DMs across the country. Later that evening, she sat at her desk overlooking the city. A candle flickered quietly next to her laptop. Her inbox was overflowing: panel requests, podcast interviews, book agents, journalists. She skimmed them, then closed the tab. Instead, she opened a new document. Blank. Titled it simply, "What I Wish I'd Heard Sooner." It would become the foundation for a mentorship series she hadn't yet announced. One designed for the women who didn't fit, who weren't picked, who were told to wait and to shrink. But who were all along the ones holding the architecture together. Just like she had. A knock came at her office door. Her assistant Maya peeked in. Just wanted to say. That speech. It changed something in here today. Elena looked up. Maya smiled. You didn't raise your voice. But somehow it made everyone stop and listen. Elena smiled back, warm but composed. That's the point. I'm not here to echo louder. I'm here to say something that resonates longer. And with that, Maya left. Elena turned back to the screen. Her voice, once dismissed, was now becoming blueprint. Her story a mirror, her presence a reminder. That being too much was never the issue. Being underestimated was. And that era was over. The letterhead was simple. Cream paper. Embossed text. No logos. Just 4 words centered at the top. The Clarity Foundation. Elena stared at it for a long moment before signing her name. The ink barely dried when the first announcement went live. A new scholarship fund for women who had been overlooked, sidelined, or told they didn't fit. It wasn't about grades. Or prestige. It was for the ones who showed up early, stayed late, said the hard thing in meetings, and were told they were too intense, too blunt, too hard to manage. Elena funded it quietly, personally. No gala, no PR push. Just a webpage, a mission, and an inbox that overflowed within the week. I cried reading this. It felt like someone finally saw me. I've been afraid to speak up for years. Now I think I will. You built the door I never thought I'd find. She read every application herself. It wasn't charity, it was legacy. It was the antidote to every conference room that had chosen comfort over competence. To every whispered, "She's too much." To every woman who'd left quietly holding pieces of herself she never should have had to hide. One afternoon, as she was reviewing essays at a downtown coffee shop, someone tapped her shoulder. Elena. She turned. And for a moment didn't recognize the woman standing there until the voice caught up with the face. Natalie Quinn, a former colleague from Apex. Quiet kind, always stayed out of conflict. Always smiled just enough. Natalie Elena said, standing. It's been a long time. Natalie nodded, eyes softer than Elena remembered. I saw the foundation announcement. I read every word. Elena gestured for her to sit. They ordered tea. For a moment they sat in silence. Then Natalie said it. I'm sorry I didn't speak up back then. The words were quiet. Heavy. Elena didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it breathe. Finally, she said, You don't have to. The silence already spoke volumes. So did my leaving. Natalie's eyes welled. Not from guilt, from recognition. And, Elena. She didn't feel anger. She felt something else. Peace. Because this wasn't about holding anyone hostage to her history, it was about changing the future. They talked for an hour. About the industry. About how many women were still being asked to choose between visibility and belonging. Between softness and strategy. Between being liked and being listened to. And when they parted, Natalie said, One last thing, I didn't know how much we lost when you left. But I see it now. A lot of us do. Elena smiled, not out of pride, but because she knew. They would never forget her name again. Weeks passed. The Clarity Foundation began its first cohort. 12 women. Diverse backgrounds. One common thread: they'd been made to feel like they were the problem when in fact they were the missing solution. Elena met each one of them. Some with fire in their voice. Others still learning how to unmute themselves. She didn't give them a formula, she gave them permission. To take up space, to ask the hard questions. To build systems that didn't ask them to shrink. She invited them into her world and then stepped aside so they could build their own. One morning, she received an email from an international business journal. They were releasing a special feature, The Silent Architects: Women Who Rewired the Industry. Elena Blake was the lead profile. She didn't reply. She just printed the article, folded it into her journal, and underlined one line. She didn't demand a seat at the table. She built a better table, then taught others how to carve their own. That night, she stood by the window in her home office. Below, the city glimmered, not in chaos, but in motion. It moved because someone had mapped the invisible threads. Because someone had cared about outcomes over optics. She sipped her tea slowly, eyes on the skyline. A notification buzzed on her phone. A message forwarded by her assistant. Hey. Wasn't Elena Blake with us a few years ago? She was the one who built the old systems, right? God. We should have listened more closely when she spoke. Let them call her name now. Elena set the phone down. No reaction. No response. She didn't need them to say it. They'd already felt it. Because Elena Blake didn't just walk away. She became the storm they thought would never come. And across every boardroom that once doubted her. Across every woman who once folded herself small to survive. Across every whisper that said, You're too much. A new voice rose, strong, measured, unshakable. And it sounded a lot like hers.